Hello, I'm Esther Githu. It's Monday, March 6th. This is Africa 54. French President Emmanuel Macron wraps up his four-nation tour of Africa with a renewed partnership. In his new book, Rescue Thyself, author Sylvanus Ayeni says change in Africa must come from within. And the creation of former U.S. President George W. Bush PEPFAR turns 20 years old. We'll have a report. All this and more coming up on today's Africa 54. French President Emmanuel Macron has wrapped up his four-nation tour of Africa with a wish for renewed partnership against the backdrop of rising anti-French sentiments in some former French colonies. Macron acknowledged that the era of French interference in Africa has ended and that there was no desire to return to the past. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
Emmanuel Macron is back in France after his African tour to renew frayed ties with the continent. Macron is anxious to roll out more economic policies to boost France's waning influence in Africa. On the second leg of his voyage, after visiting Gabon, he inked an economic accord in the Angolan capital, Luanda. Macron then held talks with his counterpart, João Lourenço, calling the oil-rich country a strategic partner in the region. At a joint news briefing held with Lourenço, Macron acknowledged the Angolan leader's role in mediating the peace efforts in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
We have just spent a long time with the President to discuss today the situation in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I want to commend your role in the mechanism for supervising and monitoring the ceasefire.
Lourenço told Macron that Angola was France's partner and his country will cooperate with France in almost all topics.
Mais uma vez, muito bem-vindo Angola. E creia que
President Macron, once again, welcome to Angola, and believe me that you have in Angola a partner in the African continent that will cooperate with France in almost all the topics, including peace and security, not just in our continent, but in the rest of the world.
After Angola, Macron landed in the Congolese capital, Brazzaville, on the third leg of his tour, where he spent a few hours before traveling to Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which lies on the opposite bank of the Congo River. Speaking during an official visit to the DRC, where perception of French support for neighboring Rwanda have stroked un-French feelings, as eastern regions battle an offensive by the M23 rebel group that Congo accuses Rwanda of backing, an accusation that Rwanda denies. Macron pledged $36 million of aid to Congo's conflict-hit east and said the party seeking to derail the peace efforts should face sanctions.
Nous allons débloquer une contribution immédiate de 34 millions d'euros d'aide humanitaire, laquelle s'ajoutera au montant de près de 50 millions annoncé par l'Union européenne.
France has previously joined the United Nations, Congo, and other countries in accusing Rwanda of supporting the M23. Back home, Macron faces a wave of union protests. Unions are threatening to shut France's economy down this week in what they hope is their toughest stand yet to Macron's plan to raise the retirement age. The retirement reform would raise the official pension age from 62 to 64. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
For more insight into Macron's visit to Central Africa, I'm joined by Bagasi Kura, VOA's Bambara Chief. Bagasi, welcome back to Africa 54.
Hi, good to be here.
What are you learning from analysts? Because we do know that the French has been really kicked out of West Africa. What is Macron's interest specifically in DRC, where we know rebels have wreaked havoc in that country? They still remain there. Any interest in maybe boosting the security measures in the country? What are you learning?
I think with all that has been happening, especially in West Africa, regarding French on the continent, I believe Macron has saw that maybe it's time to also react, to respond to what is happening, respond to the waning French influence in Africa. So this trip, starting in Gabon, it's one forest summit, which is something Macron himself and President of Gabon put together. It's not like a summit organized by big NGOs. So he went in Gabon, but also in several other countries to talk business. It's a way of him saying that I'm pivoting now from patronizing, from militarization. I'm now pivoting to be a partner, business partner, social partner, environmental partner. So that was the goal. It's not clear if he convinced many people, because as we saw in Kinshasa on Saturday, he was reluctant to condemn Rwanda's role in the crisis in Eastern Congo, which is what many people in the DRC were hoping to hear from him. And there has been some tense exchange between him and Tshisekedi during that press conference, the only one he had during the 4-day tour.
Let's move on to Angola. You know, there's a lot of oil wealth in Angola. And he was there, he met with the president, he talked about being, French being a new partner of Angola. Were there any deals made in terms of, partnership, oil deals, or any other kind of bilateral agreements?
Yeah, they didn't talk much about oil or gas. They mainly talk about new investment, business partnership in agriculture and agro-business. And I think French will be investing something around 150 million US dollar in developing agriculture and agro-business in Angola. Angola is the France is the second largest investor in Angola because of oil, as you mentioned. Angola is total backyard.
And what about Central African Republic? He also met one of the presidents. He wasn't able to visit one of the countries in the region, but there were a lot of talk about what France can do for this region, because much of this area is filled with a lot of insurgency. Yeah,
there was this meeting which was not much talked about in the media, meeting between Touadéra from Central African Republic and Macron. As we remember, in the last few years, it has not been good between the two. French troops have been kicked out of Central African Republic. French cooperation has stopped in the country, and Russian have moved in terms of Wagner Group. But it looked like Central African Republic is trying to warm up with France, with Macron. So in January, he sent a new ambassador to Paris, who told in France that they were looking for a way to warm up their relationship. And again, this time around in Gabon, Touadéra traveled and met with Macron one-on-one. We don't know the content of that discussion, but it looks like something is turning here. What Macron had to deal with was in Gabon, where opposition was asking him, look, we are having election in a few months, and this trip is clearly a way of backing Ali Bongo, which is something Macron did not expect to hear, as he was trying to show people, I'm turning the page, I'm not meddling into your local politics. And also when he went to Kinshasa, people say, look, when it comes to Ukraine, you are so vocal, you are so clear what is not acceptable. When it comes to DRC, you are not really clear, and you are not calling people by their names.
Thank you so much, Bagasi, for your insight, definitely. Bagasi Kura is VOA's Bambara chief. Hundreds of Congolese displaced by conflict in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo marched through Goma on Monday, demanding aid and improved conditions in camps. Many of the families who fled the clashes between the M23 rebel group and the Congolese army arrived in Goma with just a few belongings. Many are now sleeping in shelters or in tents built with plastic and sticks. During a visit to Kinshasa days earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron said his country, as well as other European partners, are supporting the people affected by the conflict. Hundreds of opposition supporters in Tunisia defied an official ban on their protest against the president after some of their leaders were arrested breaking through a police barrier in central Tunis Sunday to rally in the city's main street. Before the protesters broke through the barrier, police warned them by loudspeaker that their demonstration was illegal, but added that they would not stop them by force. Up to 1,000 protesters then pushed through the cordon, chanting, "Shut down the coup," and "We want the release of the arrested." The protesters showed they could mobilize on the streets in the teeth of a crackdown on its leaders. 6 states in Nigeria, Sokoto, Adamawa, Bayelsa, Akwa Ibom, Delta, and Edo have withdrawn a suit asking the country's Supreme Court to void the result of the just concluded presidential election. The 6 states from the opposition party had accused Nigeria's Electoral Commission of failing to follow its own rules and election laws in conducting the vote and announcing a winner. No reason was given for withdrawing the challenge Friday night. Nigeria's electoral law says an election can be invalidated only if it's proven that the Independent National Electoral Commission largely did not follow the law and acted in ways that could have changed the result. None of the Nigeria presidential election results has ever been overturned by the Supreme Court. In his book, Rescue Thyself, Change in Africa Must Come From Within, Dr. Sylvanus Ayeni argues one of the main reasons hindering Africa's development and progress is a failure of leadership. He says that addressing these leadership issues requires a collective effort by citizens to hold their leaders accountable and demand inclusive economic development policies that benefit all citizens. Dr. Ayeni, a retired neurosurgeon, started his medical career in Nigeria before moving to the U.S. as a young doctor to practice medicine in America. He joined VOA's Jackson Vunganyi to talk about some of the issues addressed in his book.
Let's get into some politics. Okay. What, according to your book, Rescue Thyself, which is a book that you wrote right after retiring from your career, long career as a neurosurgeon, what's your thesis? What is holding the continent back?
Well, my thesis in this book is, first, let me pull back a minute. I decided to write the book because of what I saw as if a front row participant in the development of Nigeria and some regions in sub-Saharan Africa at the grassroots level. You see, when you go to Nigeria or many of these African nations and you stay in 5-star hotel, 4-star hotel, you and your SUV and so, you really don't get to
see the real picture.
Yes, you stay in Lagos, in Accra, in Kumasi, in Kigali, in Nairobi or Kampala. No, you have to go to the villages.
Yeah. So that you're saying these cosmopolitan cities are not the real picture of the continent of Africa?
No. So when you go to these villages and you spend most of your time there, which is where I spend 90% of my time, okay, then you get a flavor. And then you see that the current leaders of these nations, okay, do not have a feeling for what is going on in these villages.
There's a disconnect.
Incredible disconnection. So I decided to write this book, okay, to show that until Africans take responsibility for themselves, there is no amount of foreign aid. You see, because the thinking in the West is that the more aid you give them, the more technology you give them, that you can lift them up. It will not happen. That is why in the past 50 years plus, more than $1 trillion has gone to these continent, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, and the nations keep sinking. So that is why I wrote this book. And I really believe that only Africans can save Africa.
So if foreign aid is not the solution to Africa's problem, what is the solution?
Well, the solution is a new set of leaders who will tackle certain problems. As I said, the failure of leadership...
With a different mindset.
Yes. Number one, the failure of mindset. Profound failure of mindset. And what do I mean by that? The mindset in the fact that we have allowed non-Africans to define whom we are. We don't even know whom we are. And that's a big topic. You see, we are not a collection of blacks. The word blacks does not mean anything because the skin color is only a few millimeters deep. Africa is the most genetically diverse continent in this world. It is the most linguistically diverse continent in this world. It is the most ethnically diverse continent in this world. It is the richest continent in this world. So we have to define ourselves by our brains. No human being is that human being's skin color. Everything you achieve in life, you achieve it through your brain. So we must define ourselves by our brain, and we must define our own destiny. Now we are allowing the West, the East, principally China and India, to make choices for us, to define our destiny.
To define our development agenda.
Exactly.
Okay.
That was Dr. Sylvanus Ayeni, a retired neurosurgeon and author of Rescue Thyself, Change in Africa Must Come From Within, speaking to VOA's Jackson Vunganyi. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, former President George W. Bush urges Washington lawmakers to reauthorize the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief. We'll have a report. Stay with us.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linoch Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
In other news, the $580,000 South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says was payment of 20 buffaloes bought by a Sudanese businessman 3 years ago is at the center of allegations that almost cost Ramaphosa his job and now endanger his chances of securing a second term after next year's elections. Namibia's state-owned oil company Namco says it has made a third oil discovery, Shell and Qatar Energy, in the Jonker 1X deep water exploration well in the Orange Basin offshore southern Namibia. And Mauritania's Interior Ministry says 4 jihadist prisoners escaped Sunday night in the capital Nouakchott after an exchange of gunfire at its central prison. 2 National Guards were killed. As Russian and Ukrainian forces intensify their fight for the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, residents there are finding it harder and harder to remain. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias reports on the challenges as Ukrainian diplomatic efforts to gain international support continue.
As fighting intensified Sunday in the outskirts of Bakhmut, reports emerged that the Ukrainian army was trying to help civilians flee. Life had already been greatly disrupted by the advances of the Russian army and mercenary force known as the Wagner Group. Local resident Natalia Ishkova told the Associated Press.
There are problems with food. Humanitarian food is given to us only once a month. There is no electricity, no water, no gas.
The Ukrainian troops are committed to fiercely pushing back the Russians, said a commander who went by the name of Kurt.
They hope to get the city without big losses, but they have lost so many people.
On Saturday, a Russian Defense Ministry spokesman, Igor Konashenkov, said Moscow's forces had destroyed several Ukrainian infantry vehicles and killed soldiers in the Donetsk region.
During the ongoing active operations of the units of the southern group of troops, airstrikes and artillery fire, up to 490 Ukrainian servicemen were killed and wounded per day.
VOA was not able to independently verify this claim. The Russian Defense Ministry also released what it said were images of Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu inspecting a command post in the Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region, where Bakhmut is located. Also over the weekend, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with European Parliament President Roberta Metsola and outlined his goals.
The task is to prepare everything as actively as possible for our country's membership in the European Union, to increase the supply of weapons to Ukraine, and to strengthen sanctions against Russia.
Metsola called for the creation of a special tribunal to investigate war crimes.
We will meet with the United Nations personnel. We need to make sure that we have the mechanisms, first of all, to collect the evidence, but then to prosecute them.
The UN documented summary executions that may constitute war crimes in the Bucha area. Over the weekend, a memorial was held there for 8 Ukrainian men who attempted to block the Russian advances a year ago, but who, according to Ukrainian authorities, were captured and killed. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
Former President George W. Bush recently urged Washington lawmakers to reauthorize the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, an initiative he launched 2 decades ago against one of the deadliest diseases at the time. Bush was joined by former President of Tanzania, Jakaya Kikwete, and others at the U.S. Institute of Peace. VOA senior correspondent Mariama Diallo reports.
Proposed the emergency plan for AIDS relief.
It was 20 years ago when former President George W. Bush made a plea before Congress at his State of the Union address.
I asked the Congress to commit $15 billion over the next 5 years, including nearly $10 billion in new money, to turn the tide against AIDS in the most afflicted nations of Africa and the Caribbean.
Fast forward to today, Bush, who came to Washington to mark his plan's 20-year anniversary, says the program to provide life-saving treatment to millions of people living with HIV and AIDS was a success. The president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, or PEPFAR, is due for reauthorization this year.
This program needs to be funded. And for the skeptics, all I ask is look at the results. And if the results don't impress you, then nothing will impress you.
The success of PEPFAR boils down to the numbers, says David Kramer, executive director of the Bush Institute.
Over 25 million lives have been saved as a result of President Bush's PEPFAR initiative. And it was a vision that he had to step in and help people who were in real need of help. He felt the United States was in a position to do so.
Since the legislation was signed into law in May 2003, PEPFAR has benefited from bipartisan support in Congress, even though its abstinence programs, a requirement later removed, had drawn criticism. Former President Donald Trump proposed to reduce PEPFAR's funds during his term, but was unsuccessful. Winnie Byanyima, executive director of the Joint United Nations Program on HIV/AIDS, or UNAIDS, recognizes PEPFAR's impact.
When he announced PEPFAR 20 years ago, our people were dying. Our countries were devastated. There was fear, there was pain, there was suffering. So we come here to honor President Bush, the American government, the American taxpayers, for $100 billion that has been put in this program.
She also says it was partnerships that formed between PEPFAR, the Global Fund, UNAIDS, civil societies, and governments that helped to turn the tide.
Thank you for your compassion.
Former President of Tanzania, Jakaya Kikwete, who joined Bush at the event, recalls getting tested publicly to encourage others who were afraid to do the same.
So the best thing is for my wife and I to lead by example. And we should not do it under the tent where nobody sees it. Of course, my veins were easy, but my wife had some problem. They pre-caught several times before they could get the... I was very sorry for her. But we said that's the price of leadership.
With a target of ending AIDS by 2030, stopping new infections is a must, especially given 2021 data, says Bianima.
Sadly, we had 1.5 million new infections worldwide, most of these in sub-Saharan Africa. We had 650,000 people who died in 2021 of AIDS-related illnesses.
Not one of those new infections and deaths had to happen, she said. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
Thank you for joining us. Good night.
ISIS and al-Qaeda affiliates continue to exploit Africa's long-simmering conflicts to bolster their illicit activities, providing them heightened lethality.
Have consistently condemned ISIS DRC for the cowardly attacks, bombings that they've carried out against the civilian population in this part of the DRC.
A successful counterterrorism strategy in Africa must always be built on and led by citizens of the countries that we are working to support. The United States